Okay. Well, I hope you had fun with that little thing on looking at the regulations. So let's talk about. So our first role was making rules and regs. Okay. Second role is investigation. So agencies, their job oftentimes, and think specifically of the EPA, they're watchdogs of certain industries. Are is this company complying with their emissions requirement from the Clean Air or the Clean Water Act? Are they appropriately storing um, toxic waste and disposing of? Um, Things like that. So and they're also watchdogs of personal people, like just like when we go to emissions and checking our emissions, right? So that's kind of like EPA checking up on our personal stuff. And if we fail emissions, what happens? We can't get our sticker on our car, right? So anyway, so different ways that agencies can investigate. One is they can require self-reporting. So especially in like the toxic waste area, they the EPA requires companies to keep records of everything, every bit of toxic waste that they have created and stored and disposed of. Um, and just keep records permanently, and they have to be open for inspection in the event that the EPA decides to come on in. Anything, and we'll learn more about this, but like permit type statutes like Clean Air and Clean Water, where they have permits to pollute a little bit, they have to keep their own records. EPGRA is like the chemicals, if you're making chemicals, all of that stuff. Okay, so that's like a huge part of how the EPA kind of monitors what companies are doing by the self-reporting. They have to either keep the records themselves and or file periodic reports with the EPA, just like the IRS, right? And if it's checked, if it's flagged and it doesn't look right, they might have somebody come in. Okay. The other thing that agencies can do for a site, SITE, they have through their enabling statute, right? They will have the power of inspection, so they'll have the right to go in and see how this factory is operating. So it might be built directly into the statute, or they can go to the courts and get a warrant or subpoena if they think somebody's polluting, or if they get a tip. Usually, companies, because they don't want to be perceived to be hiding anything, if the EPA says like, "Hey, we'd like a site inspection," they're like, "Oh yeah, no need to get a warrant or a subpoena. Come on in. We've got nothing to hide," right? So companies are often very cooperative with the EPA, don't require them to go to court, and then they just welcome them in. Some things that the agencies may not be able to do, they might not be able to view or inspect things with trade secrets. Um, they can't obviously exceed their statutory mandate, and they can't yeah, they can't violate any constitutional protection. So like say require somebody to do something that violates their Fifth Amendment rights or something like that. So that they have, you can't just barge in. um, so that's kind of your investigation arm of it. And then so now we have the teeth, right? The teeth. How can they enforce what violations of their rules and regs? So an agency, if they go and they file a nation, they might issue an order. You have to stop doing this, or you have to start doing this a different way. Non-compliance with the order, they can go to the court, and then the court can assess damages or things like that. There they can just fine people based on whatever their internal rules are, and the powers, their enabling act. They can ask a court for injunctive relief, like if it's kind of lickety split, something bad's happening, they can go to the court and say, I need you to order this company to stop doing this. If it is a permit type statute where they have a permit to emit a certain amount of pollution in the air or the water, or they have a permit to store toxic waste, they can revoke the permit and then they can't operate anymore. So, and and that's just things that they can do on their own. They can go to court, sue someone for, report it to the state's attorney or whoever the district attorney is to actually prosecute someone if there is like a criminal violation as well. Where am I looking at now? I wanted to go back. Make sure I have everything here on my... Yeah, make rules and regs. Oh, and then we're going to talk about the adjudicatory stuff next. Okay, so that's the teeth that they have. So the next thing is, like, if the agency does something and somebody gets ticked off, right? What recourse does that individual or that company have? Okay, so every party is entitled to due process under the law, right? That's a constitutional protection we all have. So if you don't like, an agency revokes your permit, what do? The first place you go to is you start with the agency. So the agency will have their own internal procedures for resolving disputes about agency actions. Okay. Sometimes it's just like, okay, you file an appeal and somebody looks at the form and either denies it or says, okay, we need some more information, or reverses the decision, something like that. So there might be paperwork first. As it escalates, there might actually be a hearing before an agency judicial person, an administrative law judge, abbreviated ALJ. If I hear ALJ, I'm talking about an administrative law judge. Okay, so these hearings, they're not like they're shorter than a court trial, fairly informal. You can have witnesses. Rules of evidence, you don't have to worry about the federal rules of evidence. It's pretty loose. Everything can kind of be brought in and the judge kind of determines what they think is credible or not. You don't have a jury. The judge is the fact finder and the finder of the law. The parties get notice. They may be represented by an attorney. They can have a right to discovery, so they can get some information beforehand. If you have some sort of expert or an employee who has an expertise in a certain area, you can call an expert witness to testify. And then at some point you can appeal to an actual court. But before you can appeal to a court, you have to exhaust whatever administrative remedies they have. So if it's paperwork, hearing, internal appeal, and then if you're still unhappy, you can go to court. So that's something before you get to court. If you haven't exhausted your administrative remedies, they're going to kick you out of court. It depends on the agency and the situation. But so an appeal of this ALJ decision will go to the court, and usually, since the ALJ determines facts, right? They are the trier of fact. They make determinations of fact. The court usually only reviews the legal issues. Occasionally, they do what we call a de novo review. They look at all the facts and kind of make a factual determination too, but that's only in cases of like when they're really alleging bad activities by the agency. Sometimes, and this is just like in the real world too, right? So before we can file a lawsuit, or once we've filed a lawsuit, we are required to participate into some dispute resolution process. We call it ADR, alternative dispute resolution, before you get to trial. So sometimes, think about it in family law, right? Somebody's getting a divorce before, rather than having a trial on the financial and, say, custody issues, they might call in a mediator, right? So you have somebody, a neutral party that both of the parties agree to, the husband and the wife, and they talk about, what they're concerned with. And the mediator doesn't make a decision, but helps them, facilitates them to figure out possible solutions, and maybe, starts writing it out. But that's comes from the parties. Now, arbitration is different. Arbitration is more adversarial, closer to a trial situation, where you choose an arbitrator. So the arbitrator, you'll get like a list of arbitrators. Everybody you can have some that you don't like, and maybe you agree to two, and another one agrees to two, and until you both actually aren't opposed to one. So that arbitrator then kind of acts as the judge, hears both sides, and imposes a decision based upon the facts and the law. Now, there's two different kinds of arbitration. There's binding arbitration, that you've somehow agreed that whatever the decision of the arbitrator is, you're going to follow it. And then there's non-binding arbitration, where it's like, well, that, the arbitrator is probably how it's going to go in court, so I'll probably follow it, but I might not. So that's arbitration. So why do we have ADR? Courts are backlogged. Litigation's expensive. Maybe you can find a compromise solution, quicker outcome, less expensive. Maybe you're concerned with trade secrets or people knowing what's going on with your company. You don't want it getting out to your shareholders at this point. Once it's in court, it's a matter of public record. And then your mediator or your arbitrator, you can choose one of them who actually has an expertise in the area. Judges don't know about chemical plants, right? They know about the law. So if you have someone with an expertise in a certain technical area, that might be very helpful. Sometimes, so cons of ADR, sometimes they are pretty expensive. Like, arbitrations can be pretty drawn out. And if, say, you have one party that is not willing to budge at all, a mediator might be a waste of time. And then, if sometimes, if there's, you guys have probably seen the movie Hot Coffee. It's like a standard for any legal professional to see that, especially with regard to litigation. If you've agreed to mandatory arbitration, you never get your day in court. So that's the con. So there is a statute, a federal statute called the Alternative Dispute Resolution Act, which permits ADR in agency proceedings only if all parties agree to it. So what else? Okay, so we have, if we've exhausted our administrative remedies, and then we go to court, right? So sometimes you go to, it depends on the agency and the Enabling Act, whether you go from there to the trial court, or to like an appellate court. Look to the statute for what's appropriate there. Before you can get that, you need standing, right? You have to figure out what the appropriate court is. It's, if you're dealing with a federal agency, obviously it's a federal court, but say it's a tax issue, you might go to the tax court or something along those lines. Who's the appropriate defendant? Like that Sierra Club versus Morton. Like Morton was the head of the Federal Lands Bureau, so that's why he was the defendant there. So it's like, the commissioner or the secretary of so-and-so would probably be your appropriate defendant. So courts, judicial review of agency action. We talked earlier in this module about the procedures of the APA. So the APA provides processes that every agency has to go through before they, make a rule, right? And if an agency doesn't follow those processes, those decisions will be overturned by a court. if the NEPA, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks, National Environmental Policy Act, requires processes for every agency to perform before there's an agency action. If they don't follow those procedures, their action will be overturned. So they don't. So courts, when they are reviewing an agency action, really don't look at actually what they're doing, what the agency action is. They're looking at whether they crossed their T's and dotted their I's. Okay, so they defer to the agency because presumably they have some expertise in that area, right? Like, as I said, uh, a judge doesn't have experience with engineering a nuclear power plant, but the EPA does. They have people who do. So they overturn activities only if they either didn't follow the rules, or if they were, if they didn't follow the rules, they're found to be arbitrary and capricious, right? They're not following the rules for the process. If so that's one standard, right? Or if somehow the agency acted out of the power from that enabling statute that we talked about earlier, they'd say, all right, you don't even have this power. You're acting out of your power. So you're acting ultra vires. Well, some Latin thrown in there. Everybody loves a little Latin there. I think that's on the quiz too. So as long as your agency went through the proper process and didn't exceed their power, their actions will be upheld. So whether you think it's right or wrong, but as long as they followed the process and stayed within their authority, that's the judges will uphold what's going on there. All right, next topic here. Even the 5 seconds we looked at the EPA website, there's a lot of stuff in there. Agencies have access to a lot of information. Sometimes they're given the mandate that they need to research and come up with studies to determine different sorts of things. So they compile a lot of information. And then in our country, public information is available to the public. So a lot of times they just put that stuff out there on their website, right? We've got a lot of stuff out on each individual website for each individual agency. But if you want something more specific than that, or they can't put everything out there. There's limits to what can be on a website. Any individual can request information from an agency using the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA request. Okay, the Freedom of Information Act is a law that requires agencies, actually at any, say, if we're looking at the federal one, any federal entity, they have to disclose what we call non-exempt information if you ask. Okay, so what do you have to do under FOIA? You have to have a written request. It can be probably, I think a lot of times now you can just do it directly from their website, do a website request for information, like through a link. Maybe it's an email, maybe it's a letter. In that written request, you need to say, I am requesting this information pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act. Okay, so those are like your magic words, pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act. And then they're like, ding, 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 because if they don't respond within 10 days to your request, they get penalized. So they have to, those things kind of get addressed right away. So you put that in the front of your letter. You have to say you can't just say, I want all your stuff on that company that's on the, Morinville Road or something like that. That's not enough. You have to ask for the specific information to let them know what's going on. You, as a requester, if there is any search or copying fees, the requester pays for that. So the agency has to respond by complying, by giving you what you want, or claiming an exemption within 10 days. Okay, reasons. So exemptions are, I think I talk about it on the next page. We'll talk about it on the next page then, so I don't talk about it twice. So they have to respond by either giving you what you want or claiming an exemption within 10 days of receipt. Okay. If I dispute the exemption, I might ask for a review of that. And then the agency might need to file what's called a Vaughan index. So it's almost like a privilege log. So a list of documents withheld and the reason for non-disclosure, like, letter A, letter dated, blah, 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 withheld because personal privileged information is in there. Or maybe that kind of thing. And again, if they don't comply with FOIA requests, agencies can get fined. And then if you actually go to review and there's attorneys, they have to pay the attorney's fees. So FOIA is great. So that's the federal FOIA statute. There's also in Illinois, every state has a Freedom of Information Act request. So like I remember I was working at public library and they're being like actually harassed by like FOIA requests. Like one of them was, why does that woman always wear that red dress to the board meetings? Like ridiculous, really just harassment. But they had to be responded to within 10 days. Otherwise, the library would have been fined. So if you work anywhere in the public, you have to deal with FOIA requests. Okay, sunshine laws, they kind of go hand in hand with FOIA requests. Sunshine laws is like, any public proceeding, agencies, they're required to hold, their meetings open to the public. So you can come in and sit in on a meeting. So if there's any like big meeting, the public has to be given advance notice with the agenda and location, and people can attend. I think they're more really apropos in like local kind of government. So say you have, your town board is having the meeting, people can attend. And they might have parts that are confidential that they go and, they might have if they're voting, they might, if they're having secret ballots, I guess that's the word I'm looking for, that part, the voting is not public, but then they will, anything where they're addressing proposals and things like that, people should be allowed and open to public. And then you'll even see, like, if you go to a local town website, they'll have like the minutes of their meetings as part of this sunshine law, so that they're not doing things shady behind closed doors. Okay, so what is protected, right, when we're talking about exemptions? So the Privacy Act, and this makes sense, right, that agencies can't disclose information on people, right? So if I had a dispute with the Social Security board, they can't disclose my name, my address, obviously not my Social Security number, my phone number, anything, any personal information on anybody. They can't. Now I can ask, how many Social Security adjudications have you had in the past 5 years, right? That's a question I can ask, but I can't ask for information on the individuals. If sometimes with agencies, if say you're dealing with the Veterans Administration and Social Security or something like that, say you're like at the VA hospital and Medicare, that's what I'm kind of thinking of, right? You can file a waiver so that they can share your information, just like HIPAA. You guys understand HIPAA, right? When you go to the doctor, they can't share that information, but say you need medical records sent somewhere, you have to do a HIPAA waiver, that kind of thing. So, and trade secrets, so that's for people. Trade secrets, that protects businesses from disclosure. So say I have the secret formula to Coca-Cola or something. I don't want that getting out. So companies can be protected from their secret formulas get out. And when we talk about manufacturing of chemicals, we will talk more about that. Okay, so next one is, in these agency actions, like before the ALJ, you are permitted to be represented by an attorney. Like, okay, if you want an attorney present, you're allowed to have an attorney present and representing you. You can represent yourself. And then in agency hearings, oftentimes non-lawyers are permitted to specifically represent an individual. Okay. So in court, as we know, we can't represent, we as paralegals can't represent anyone in court, right? That's the unauthorized practice of law. Although a lot of like states are kind of changing things on that. So we'll see what happens with that. But some agencies, so Social Security, I think immigration, I was actually trying to find a complete list. But this is just an area that if you want to be an advocate for someone in a particular kind of thing, unemployment, Social Security, immigration, it might be an opportunity as a paralegal to be of use. So that to be continued. This is something that continues to go on. So the textbook talks about like, oh, there's all these rules and regs. What about small businesses? So small businesses are subject to agency rules and regs, just like small people are. And it's a lot to cover, right? So, if I'm just opening up a small restaurant, I need to know, I have to have for my employees, I need to have unemployment insurance. I need to comply with all IRS requirements, the Secretary of State requirements, right? For filings, environmental, OSHA, right? OSHA, which is, workplace safety, Department of Transportation. That was in this example that they gave in the book. But, in a restaurant, all of the Board of Health, the FDA kinds of things. Sometimes some states require you put calories on your menu, like all of that stuff. You have to follow the rules. Otherwise, you can get fined. Bad things can happen. So this is in the book on page 46. They talk about, somebody who has like a school bus fleet. They got to deal with this. And like, well, yeah, they have your emissions, and then you have your safety things for heavy duty trucks, and then you probably have your your licensing requirements, all that stuff. So small businesses have to deal with this. So what do? Maybe they hire a consultant, right, to say, I'm starting a small business, what do I need? Right, you find a consultant to give you the steps that you need. You might outsource some of the stuff, like, okay, payroll, I can't do that all myself, I'm going to outsource that to a different company. Or maintenance of my buses, franchising. So maybe if I'm opening up a business, I open up an existing franchise where I have access to all of their expertise and forms and websites that I can deal with that. There is a federal law called the Regulatory Flexibility Act. I say requires the EPA, but requires all the federal agencies to consider small businesses when they are making their rules and regs, and not make things too hard. I mean, I guess there is procedural requirements, analysis, and procedural requirements on federal agencies on that. So they have to consider economic impacts the rules will have on small entities, and also give small business a voice when they make these policy determinations. So that's small businesses. The last bits. Okay, so I don't think I talked about this week. Last week we had so much. But at the end of the chapter, there are key terms and review questions. And I would like you, before you do your quiz, and this will be a good way to prep for your quiz, to look through those key terms, make sure you understand what they are, go back to the PowerPoint, go back to the chapter to make sure you understand those key terms. Key terms are great things in quizzes, right? And tests. And then the review questions. And if you are struggling answering those questions, please reach out to me so I can help you, or you can come to the office hours. Sometimes I'll actually assign some of the review questions as classwork. So that just FYI. So our assignments for this week, we have our quiz, that discussion board we talked about, which is the proposed, looking up the proposed rule. Our classwork is on FOIA, which is assignment is it 2 dash, yeah, I think it's 2-5 assignment. Yes, on page 42. And then the homework is case interpretation and agency law, the assignment 2-6 on page 50, which just a couple of questions there. So that's it for this week. I will chat with you in the next module. Please reach out if you have any questions.